Hello everyone. This presentation, titled Contamination Start to Finish and Its Effects, has been completed and will be presented by Megan Donito, Cynthia Hunter, and Anjali Thawani. The first half of our presentation will focus on the consequences a town took on due to the contamination from a chemical plant. This issue of chemical dumping, which took place in Toms River, New Jersey, was so severe that it led to polluted drinking water and pollution. Rather than the chemical plant resolving the issue of pollution, they simply turned away and avoided dealing with the fact that chemical pollutants had seeped into the town's public water supply. This not only led to negative effects on wildlife, but a number of health consequences, and it also led to the morbidity and mortality of hundreds of adults and children from cancer. Pregnant women are vulnerable due to the risk of harming their unborn children, and children, especially infants, do not have mature immune systems, and due to the exposure in utero, they may suffer neurological defects as a result of the pollution. Some children developed cancer as early as 6 months old, and as a result of exposure to the harmful chemicals. Children lack enzymes needed to break down and remove toxic chemicals from the body. The chemicals involved in contamination were trichloroethylene and benzene, and they are both suspected carcinogens and were found to be polluted throughout Toms River. The toxic chemicals exposed the town for years due to the mishandling of the toxic waste. The Ciba-Geigy plant attempted to hide the contamination by creating a pipeline for the waste directly into the ocean. Both chemicals can be exposed in a number of ways. For instance, benzene can be found in automobile service stations, exhaust, tobacco smoke, and industrial emissions. TCE is found in air, water, food, soil, and direct skin contact. Both chemicals were discovered in the water within Toms River, which exposed the entire town to the contaminated drinking water. 7,500 people live in the Toms River section of the Dover Township of New Jersey. Although primarily suburban, the 42 miles area contains 2 sites classified by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency as National Priorities List sites, the Ciba-Geigy and Reich Farms facilities, and a municipal landfill that had also previously received industrial waste. These 3 sites contributed to the groundwater contamination in Toms River. This groundwater has served as the area's sole source of potable water, including water supply wells. Other sources of exposure included styrene acrylonitrile dimer and styrene acrylonitrile dimer, which was found in the drinking water supply 10 years after the water was first tested and the TCE was found. Styrene can present in air, soil, water, and food sources. These 3 pollutants can enter the body in several different ways. Benzene is inhaled. TCE can get into the body via ingestion, inhalation, or direct skin contact, and styrene can get into the body by inhalation, ingestion through drinking water or food, and dermal skin contact. The residents of Toms River ingested TCE via the contaminated water supply in the river, and benzene is a byproduct of the Ciba-Geigy plant. With its close proximity to the town of Toms River, residents were frequently exposed to the chemical. In addition, 2 other cancer-causing chemicals were found 10 years after the initial testing at Toms River. Since these chemicals were not on the EPA hazardous chemical list, they were not tested for initially. The water was aerated out and then felt to be safe. The choice was made to not install carbon filters, which would have provided the increased water safety that was needed. TCE and benzene in the town of Toms River is proven through epidemiological studies to be linked to multiple childhood cancers that the children developed in the mid to late 90s. This resulted in a high rate of leukemia in girls and brain and central nervous system cancers in multiple children. This is forever known as the cancer cluster. In addition, the International Agency for Research on Cancer has also determined that styrene is a possible carcinogen as well. The most common health problems in workers exposed to styrene involve the nervous system. These health effects include changes in color vision, tiredness, feeling drunk, slowed reaction time, concentration problems, and balance problems. Modern knowledge about public health issues and their relationships to environmental hazards such as chemical exposure was not as closely looked at or understood during the Toms River contamination event time period. Although some of the dumping by Union Carbide and Ciba-Geigy was done illegally, the regulations were more lax during that time. However, the company could have been forthcoming with the public and also not irresponsibly dump the waste near the public drinking supply at Reich Farm or run a pipeline into the busy shoreline. Earlier testing of the water supply should have been performed, carbon filters should have been installed, and the waste should not have been dumped near the groundwater supply or via a pipe through a busy shoreline. After being declared a Superfund site, the EPA and Union Carbide adopted a remediation plan by aerating the water, thinking that the water would be safe to drink initially. Cons to these company actions: the chemical and water companies were not forthcoming with information that should have been transparent to the public concerning what happened to the public water supply. When the chemical plant's own water wells were contaminated, they moved the wells and did not investigate any further. At this point, the pollutants were seeping toward the water supply for the town. Eventually, a waste pipeline was built for dumping directly into the nearby ocean. Unfortunately, the initial remediation plan did not consist of the installation of carbon filters on the water supply, stating that the TCE would aerate out. They also did not test for other chemicals, as they were not on the EPA's limited priority pollutant list. 2 other cancer-causing chemicals were not tested for either. Unfortunately, these chemicals were present for 10 more years until the company demanded answers concerning the high rates of childhood cancer in the region. In retrospect, many mistakes were made, beginning with the obvious mistake of carelessly dumping chemical waste in the area. The well fields should have been moved back in the 1970s upon discovery of the dumping. Testing should have occurred earlier, and carbon filters should have also been installed if the water source was unable to be moved. Some pros of the company's actions are that upon identification of the cancer-causing chemicals, 8 wells were shut down immediately and carbon filters were finally installed. As it results to the government's actions, the cons are that the EPA did not list 2 cancer-causing chemicals on their priority pollutants list. Had these chemicals been listed, they would have been identified during the testing in 1986 when the initial TCE was found. Declaration of Toms River as a Superfund site. The pros are, from the late 1980s to the mid-1990s, the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry and officials from the New Jersey Department of Health, which is now known as the New Jersey Department of Health and Senior Services, identified public health threats from the Ciba-Geigy and Wright Farm facilities. In 1995, ATSDR asked the NJDHSS to investigate childhood cancers in the area. This was prompted by a nurse at a community hospital and a community member who had contacted the ATSDR to try and get their attention concerning the rate of childhood cancers in the area. Results of their investigation had identified a cancer cluster in the area of the Dover Township and Toms River sections, revealing the childhood cancer rates were higher than expected. This prompted a partnership between community members, public health officials, and research organizations, serving as a catalyst for a public health response plan. As the U.S. EPA and the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection completed their investigation into the contaminants at the Ciba-Geigy and Wright Farm sites, state and federal environmental public health staff reevaluated the health threat of these sites through additional health assessments and consultation, which prompted investigation into other area sites. This was a definite pro that was born out of the governmental action. The second half of this presentation will focus on a case study involving pyrofuricol and polyfuricol contaminants in the U.S. This case study will involve an overview regarding the detection of toxic chemicals, pyrofuricol, and polyfuricol in drinking water. The companies involved were fully aware of the following effects of the toxic chemicals. They persist in the environment, they do not degrade, accumulate and build up in animals and humans exposed to PFAS, potential or confirmed carcinogens, and continued manufacture and use of PFAS would result in continued and increased levels of these chemicals getting into the environment and into people's bodies. Due to the lack of federal standards that were in place when this issue was first identified, states ended up taking matters into their own hands and created state laws to protect individuals. All people who use city water are at risk of ingesting these 2 chemicals. The only city in the United States that does not have this chemical in their water system is Meridian, Mississippi, and this is because the city uses well water located 700 feet below ground. The chemicals in the water is a result of the chemicals being spilled into the soil, but only travel so far. The farther underground the water supply is, the less likely the chemicals will be in it, which is why Meridian, Mississippi is able to be free of the pollution. These 2 chemicals are also found in food packaging, cookware, and other consumer products. These forever chemicals are poorly absorbed through the skin, but being in customer products such as food packaging does put a person at risk for ingesting salt. The two chemicals that were involved, also known as PFAS, are toxic fluorinated chemicals and are located in the drinking water in multiple cities throughout the United States, including major metropolitan cities. Both these chemicals are known as forever chemicals because after having been released into the environment, they do not break down, but rather they build up in the blood and organs throughout our bodies. The sources of exposure from these chemicals are identified in tap water by the Environmental Protection Agency. However, these chemicals can also be identified in consumer products such as food packaging and even dust. Considering that the chemicals were discovered throughout tap water, individuals had ingested them while drinking water. The chemicals can only be absorbed through ingestion. They are poorly absorbed by the skin, and despite this rare occurrence, if the chemicals are used to package food, a person is at risk of ingesting it through that contaminated source. There are several major health effects as it relates to these two chemicals, such as an increased risk of cancer, harmful development of a fetus, reduction in the effectiveness of vaccines, obesity, high cholesterol, immunosuppression, pregnancy-induced hypertension, liver damage, and thyroid disease. Seeing as the Environmental Protection Agency was first informed of this issue back in 2001, nearly 20 years ago, action had not been taken. This issue could have put to a stop years ago if an enforceable legal limit had been set. Due to the absence of a legal limit set by the federal government, states began setting their own legal limits. New Jersey, California, Connecticut, Michigan, and New York are some of the states that have set limits on these chemicals. Some of the pros of the government's actions involve lifetime health advisory developed by the EPA, and some states have been forthcoming with publicizing additional water testing results which were conducted. Some cons involve the lifetime health advisory by the EPA is non-enforceable, there's no federal standard, and states are enforced to develop their own legal limit, but not all 50 states have adopted this. The EPA's unregulated contaminant monitoring program included only 6 PFAS compounds, and the minimum reporting limits were from 10 ppt to 90 ppt, obscuring the full scope of PFAS contamination. And the EPA and state environmental agencies have not publicly reported the levels of contamination. There is not one person or company at fault when it comes to the pollution of these two harmful chemicals. The chemicals can be a result of poor waste management. Chemical manufacturing plants may unintentionally expose the environment to these chemicals when dumping waste. The chemicals are also found in the foam produced when putting out fires, which is also absorbed into the groundwater or soil when used. Pros of the responsible parties. DuPont was one particular company that contributed to the harmful chemicals, as they were used to make Teflon, utilized for 3M Scotchgard. They eventually did phase out the PFOA compounds after pressure from the EPA. The state's lawsuit asserts that the following 17 defendants deliberately concealed the dangers of PFAS and withheld scientific evidence and intentionally, knowingly, and recklessly sold, distributed, released, transported, supplied, arranged for disposal of treatment, handled, and used the PFAS and PFAS-containing materials in Michigan in a way that they knew would contaminate natural resources and expose Michigan residents to harm. The cons were that they were waiting so long to create enforceable and nationwide legal limits, thus causing harm to individuals throughout the states impacted, and knowingly and irresponsibly distributed, released, transferred, and organized the disposal of PFAS. Thank you for watching this presentation on an overview of Toms River and our personal case study on PFAS chemicals.